Hi, it's Scott, Rockfile, back with another podcast review for you. Let's talk about a David Cronenberg movie I've never seen until now, 1979's The Brood. I was really too young to see this when it came out, although I watched Scanners 2 years later. For a budget that was about 1.5 million Canadian, went on to have a box office of $5 million, and arguably not a bad film. The Brood came out in a brand new 4K edition from Second Sight, a UK boutique label. They do these really cool box sets in hard boxes. I'll put some video up. Usually comes with a book, some postcard art, and the 4Ks duplicate everything on the Blu-ray. Because they are English, the Blu-rays are usually region B locked, but the 4Ks are not, and they duplicate everything on the Blu-ray on the 4K, so if you're not worried about watching it in standard high definition, you only need the 4K, these sets are great for you. And there's a lot of companies over here importing them, so you don't have to pay the very large postal fees that are required to ship some things. Whew, Scanners was a bit pricey. This I put all in an order with some other things I'll be reviewing soon, and it worked out to be a great deal. Pre-ordered it before it came out because even though it in my personal recollection of this film, it didn't have the best reputation, so I've never seen it. And I never knew it was a David Cronenberg movie until I got really, really into David Cronenberg and all of his movies. I'm like, he directed that one? But I've since watched Rabid, and I've watched Shivers, the movies he did before this. And, of course, I was a fan of Scanners and everything after. So this was kind of like a hole in my movie brain, and finally got it. When I was watching the Scanners release, that was really good, by the way. If you haven't listened to that podcast, please do. Found out that Howard Shore began working with him on The Brood. Howard Shore's a big guy doing movie music these days. I got to say, this is, since I know the backstory, it's a little obvious, but other than that, it's arguably, and I keep saying arguably because not everybody agrees, it's a hair better than Scanners, and Scanners has always been a favorite of mine. But watching them back to back, I think this was more cohesive. The story is about a gentleman and his wife. She's sequestered away, suffering from some kind of mental illness, and bizarre murders start happening. That's kind of the narrative, and I don't want to give too much away. Obviously, with a title like The Brood and some of its reputation, you might know what's going on. I think some of it works. A lot of it works. I think a little bit of it doesn't, but it was also 1979, low-budget Canadian feature, and some practical effects dudes doing some of their finest work. It builds up, as some of the early Cronenberg movies did, to the big shocker towards the end. And it is, still today, from 1979 all the way to today, still quite a shocking scene. If you haven't seen the movie, you don't know what I'm talking about, but there's kind of a reveal of things, how things have been happening and whatever. And it's still to this day disgusting. Now, compared to watching something like The Substance, this movie pales, but you have to put yourself back in that little time capsule and go back to 1979 and realize there was nothing out there like this. He really pushed the envelope. Now, some of the other stuff, makeup effects on the quote-unquote creatures that are doing the murders and such, hit or miss, okay, but having really good actors like Oliver Reed and Samantha Eggar in this film raise things up quite a bit. They talk about the fact that working with Oliver Reed was a huge deal. He was a big star at the time, so to speak, had done some really, really fine work, and to get him in a lower budgeted film, a really horror film. This doesn't have as much science fiction as, say, something like Scanners and Videodrome has in it. This is more just horror movie. It's considered the only movie in his entire directorial canon that's pretty much just straight up horror. And it is. I think Samantha Eggar gives a 125% performance. I think Oliver Reed is great. Art Hindle and a few of the other people. Everybody's giving top-notch performances to a young director who knew what he wanted to do. Now, if you don't know the backstory, a few years earlier, David Cronenberg went through a horrible divorce. You probably see where I'm going with this. And the movie is kind of an analogy, a metaphor for what he and his daughter went through. And he found the movie very cathartic. He looks back on it positively because, well, Samantha Eggar's character kind of was his wife, as those kind of things go. And He felt it was very cathartic to, well, what happens in the film. I don't want to give anything away. This is a movie that I've made through my entire life not seeing it. Back earlier in the early 21st century, Chicago film critics ranked this as like 88th scariest film of all time. Criterion Collection has released it on Blu-ray, but this is the first time it got a 4K release. So I'm doing a little bit of an unboxing, and if this sounds like your cup of tea, this is the version to get. I would say it looks even better than Scanners did. Scanners felt more guerrilla filmmaking. Looks like they were kind of under the gun, trying to get things done. And when you watch some of the extras, you find out that was what was really going on. This was more of obviously an idea that he worked out in his head for years before he got behind the camera and put everything together. The practical effects, like I said, some of the creature effects are not that great, but the big reveal and those effects, spectacular. I mean, it still today is a gross out factor on the level of something like The Substance. I mentioned that again because, well, that's the ultimate in modern body horror. Now that David Cronenberg is back into directing and has another one coming out this year, we'll see what happens with The Shrouds. But for an early David Cronenberg film that I had never seen, a little blown away by this, Again, it kind of has that pacing of the early David Cronenberg movies. You have the spurts of the horror with some long building of tension, but people don't do that anymore. As I watch recent movies, horror movies of this kind of ilk, they just jump right into it, and you really don't have time to build up the characters. And so maybe a bit of patience is required to watch this movie, but I think it hits harder towards the end than a lot of modern movies do because of that. And maybe we need to get back to a little more of that. I've said in 100 podcasts of my podcasting career here that I'm not into the slow burn anymore. I have seen so many slow burn stories, but every once in a while one comes along that, okay, this was the quintessential slow burn, and this is one of those. From 1979, David Cronenberg's The Brood is now available in an imported 4K edition that you can get. Hopefully we'll get one on the States side, but if you want to pick this up, it's worth it. It's quite the cult film. If you've ever been through a horrible divorce, you might like it from that aspect. He still does. But I think the performances are solid. And if you like movies like his later stuff, Scanners, Videodrome, and like this falls into that very much so. It's very much one of his early works, and you can see his hands in everything. And to that extent, what his son is now starting to do. It's quintessential Cronenberg, something I've never seen. I don't know how many times I'll come back to it, but it's nice having the essays in the book. It's a nice big bound book. The 4K looked and sounded terrific. It's a mono soundtrack, but it sounded great. It sounded better than like the 5.1 for Scanners, to be perfectly honest. All in all, this gets a half star more than the Scanners release. It looks and sounds great, and the movie was better, much better than I expected. Honestly, growing up with a name like The Brood and not knowing who made it, I thought it was just one of those cheap horror movies, like what was the one with the little kid with the claws? It something? Anyway, The Brood was actually better than I expected. This 4K edition, definitely worth picking up. So far, everything from Second Sight. They just had a couple more announcements of things coming this summer that look pretty good. So Howard Shore Music, the extras. Another great thing about Second Sight, they have commissioned a lot of extras. You talk to... everybody's missing but David Cronenberg, but there's an older conversation with him. But you do talk to people behind the scenes, some people you don't even expect that were smaller characters in the movie, still around, talk about working with Cronenberg and the other actors. The extras are worth picking up. They're all, 6-8 minutes each. They're not super long, 10 minutes. There was a couple that were almost 20 minutes, the conversation with Howard Shore. And you can tell that some of these conversations were the second half or the first half of a conversation that was featured on Scanners. I watched that version first, but Second Sight put both of these out within a few months of each other. Obviously, some of the extras, since it was the same producers, and even some of the behind-the-scenes makeup people, special effects people, they could talk to the same people and do both releases. They are not mentioning each movie back and forth so much, but it was interesting that some of them are wearing the same clothes that they're wearing in the extras I just watched in the Scanners release. Second Sight does a great job if you want to go check out their site, and if you've never seen this movie, The Brood, kind of impressed for what it is. It's definitely the horror side of David Cronenberg's career. I'm Scott. I'm Rockfile. I got more podcasts on the way. Actually, some more Second Sight videos will be coming, so we'll talk about it. More drone videos, more Alaska stuff, and just a quick thank you because we've done it this week. The St. Jude Radiothon, two of my 6 radio stations participate in it every year. We raised over $88,000 for St. Jude, which is just an amazing, amazing thing to do in such a small market that we're in. That's not unrelated to anything I'm talking about. It's just in recent memory, and I should mention it because if you don't support St. Jude, you should. They're curing cancer, and it's amazing. Anyway, thanks for listening to a podcast today. Have a spectacular day.